Our next speaker is Dr. Mark MIMS. He is a physician at Operation Ukraine at OU Health, University of Oklahoma. He will be speaking about achieving a two-way street, how to get Ukrainian physician hands-on in America. Please welcome.
Thank you, Natalia, and thank you for that great panel. I think we're going to be able to kind of transition very nicely with that last slide about, observerships maybe not being enough, and what's really the next step as far as training in the United States. And so we'll be talking about, what a two-way street model looks like and a couple of different ways that we can achieve that. So while they're working, I'll just give a brief overview of my project, which is Operation Ukraine. It is a one-month observership in Oklahoma at the University of Oklahoma. We bring predominantly reconstructive surgeons over to Oklahoma. During the 4-week course, they do usually between 6 to 8 cadaver labs. That's 1 to 2 per week that are guided by our faculty members. This is often touted as one of the most valuable experiences for them. As we know, after medical school in Ukraine, cadavers are no longer available to learn new techniques in a very low pressure situation where it keeps patients safe. And so the ability to have that opportunity and then go to the operating room and see those same procedures done on patients is a really good follow-up and an ability to kind of translate that experience through. The other thing that we try to do is we try to expose them not only to the clinical side of things, but the other aspects of academic medicine in the United States. This includes being a part of our departmental grand rounds, our departmental morbidity mortality conferences. They're often surprised that we would get up in front of everybody and talk about our failures and our complications and in a constructive manner. And then we try to get them involved in research. As we've heard from many different speakers so far, research is a critical aspect of advancing healthcare and not losing the knowledge that is currently being gained. And so we invite them to collaborate on our projects. We also invite them when they return to collaborate with us to kind of create their own projects. One that we're currently working on is at our grand rounds where we allowed the most recent Ukrainian surgeons to present. One of them talked about how she noticed that when she closed when she closed contaminated wounds earlier, the patients had better outcomes than delaying closure for it to be completely cleaned out. And so I said, well, please send us the data. We have our statisticians, we have our writers, we can help with this, and we can really get this information out there, because if this is true, then we need to be sharing this with everybody. So, all right, so we talked a little bit about my project. This is our mission statement here. Concentrated in-depth exposures, critical needs specialties, and then observation and hands-on experiences. We talked about the layout of it. This is our current status. So we've had 6 different cohorts, 32 different surgeons from 5 different specialties. We initially mostly did civilian surgeons, but through our partnership with Razum and kind of asking, it was determined that the military surgeons were perhaps ones that had a greater need and less opportunity, and so we switched our focus to military surgeons and predominantly from the Eastern Front. And so most of the ones from Kyiv and Lviv are from our early cohorts, and everything more to the east has been our more recent cohorts. We initially started in head and neck reconstruction, which is kind of where my expertise is, but quickly expanded to other things. And with the first 3 cohorts on our post-observation survey, and I would always ask them, what could we do better for future groups? And the response was always the same. This is a great experience, we love it, it's great, but we really wish we could be hands-on. And after the 3rd time of them hitting me over the head with this, I said, okay, well, maybe we should try to do something about it. I mean, I know that other places have tried. I've not known any places that have actually done it, but I thought we would at least try. So I looked in the literature first. I said, maybe somebody's published about this. And there's a lot of publications about the need for it, but there are no publications about somebody actually doing it and what the experience is. And so, I went to my chair of my department and said, would you support me if I was able to do this? And so he said yes. And so I tried to figure out what my pathway forward was going to be. And this is kind of eventually what I settled on. So I first went to the Oklahoma State Medical Board. It was first a small committee meeting and then the full board meeting. And it was interesting because I presented the case. I talked about the guardrails we were going to put in place and all this, that, and the other. And there was a 13-member panel, and they took a vote, and it was yes, 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 all through the first 12. And number 13 was the lawyer. And the lawyer says, look, this sounds great, but I don't think that we have the legislation in our bylaws to actually give you a license. But, he said, what you're describing, the guardrails that you're putting in place, the things that you're doing, it sounds like you're not letting them be an independent medical practitioner. They're more like a medical student. And so he said, if your institution is willing to assume all of the risk of credentialing, of risk and liability, then I think we as a medical board would be comfortable with you going forward with that. And so I said, great, no problem. I'll just convince my hospital of this. And so I went to our executive leadership team because I figured I might as well start at the top, because if they say no, it doesn't matter what anybody below them says. And fortunately, they had been through this now for 3 cohorts. They had gotten a lot of positive reinforcement from local media stories and outreaches and things like this. And so they were much more open than maybe they would have been had I come just de novo to them. So they said, yes, but you got to talk to legal and risk and credentialing. I said, great, more lawyers, that's no problem. And so, I kind of did the same thing. I sold them the story. I talked about the mission. And again, because they had seen those early successes, and in fact, I had kind of brought them and invited them to some of the grand rounds presentations, and they'd gotten to meet some of the surgeons, they were all on board with it. And so we eventually got approval for this to occur. And here are the 4 rules that I placed on our surgeons. They must be directly supervised. They can only be scrubbed in when the attending is scrubbed in. They can't perform key portions. And then because we have medical students, residents, and fellows, they couldn't interfere with our other learners. And I felt like this was important to really win over the hospital, because they've got a fiscal and a much more invested responsibility to those learners. So I wanted to make it clear that we weren't going to be infringing upon them. So this is our experience so far: 164 different surgeries that have been scrubbed in, hands-on, by Ukrainian surgeons operating on American patients, predominantly in the head, neck, and oculoplastics fields. Trauma surgery was our most recent addition to our program, which is why that number is a little bit lower. Neurosurgery, it is what it is. Longer cases, fewer case volumes. Orthopedics was also a more recent addition, so they're building those numbers up quite quickly. So that's one way of doing it, but really the more sustainable and translatable way would be to have some sort of legislation in the medical bylaws to allow for short-term licensure of foreign medical providers. It's easier for an institution, I think, to accept if the state medical board says, yes, we'll give them a medical license. Then when you come to your hospital or your clinic, then it's a little bit easier for them to accept that. And so, where does such legislation exist? Actually, in quite a few states across the country. And so not quite half have it. And if you look, most of it is centered in that central third of the country. I'm not sure why that is, why the Northeast and the West Coast are a little bit more reluctant, although California is in there. But those central areas and a lot of high-powered institutions fall into these areas. And so it's very doable because the legislation is already there. Now, this legislation always has nuances to it. Some of them require you to be from an ECFMG accredited school. Some of them require certain testing type things, but they can all be modifiable and kind of bent, if you will, to fit the needs of bringing Ukrainian surgeons over and getting them a medical license. And if there isn't one, if your state is not represented, then it's a matter of talking to your representatives and talking to your political people at your institutions, because Oklahoma just passed a resolution so that we will have an opportunity to get an actual formal medical license. Tennessee just did the same. Vanderbilt is very close to bringing their first cohort of surgeons from Africa to learn transplant surgery hands-on at Vanderbilt. And so I think this is where we're starting to go, and we're starting to recognize that this is a need and that we can do it in a safe manner. of those 164 cases that I showed you, we've had 0 complications. I would go and do random spot checks of compliance with the assigned rules. I've only had one time where they were not in compliance, and basically it was the end of the case. They were closing the skin, and the attending surgeon has scrubbed out to work on the computer, and the Ukrainian surgeon remained scrubbed in. So that's the only time that they technically weren't in compliance with our set guide rails. But other than that, I found they were extremely compliant with them. So some final tips on how we can achieve this in the United States. Institutional support is critical, whether that's the credentialing, the legal, the risk, or just giving the resources necessary, the manpower, and allowing you to do this is necessary. So how do you get their support? Build it with early success. So maybe don't start by going in there and say, hey, I really want to bring some people over. They're going to scrub in. They're going to do cases independently. Maybe start with, I'm going to do a small cohort of observers. And then while those observers are there, get the media involved, get them some positive reinforcement at an institutional level so that when you come back with that bigger ask, then they're more open to it. Sell the mission. I think this is also critical. If I just said, hey, I want to bring some surgeons from Canada down to operate with us, they probably would have not been super excited about it. But when you can demonstrate a medical need, that there are patients that are suffering because of a lack of training, then the medical providers and all of us come out and say, yes, we need to do something to help this, and this person is providing me with a solution that I can just say yes to, and they'll take care of the rest. Funding is another area which obviously every observership, every program struggles with. But I think that if you can, again, sell the mission and start with small successes, it becomes much easier down the road. And finally, don't give up. It was almost a full year of work and endless meetings and revisions and all of this to get this to where it is today. But the purpose was there, the need was there, and the surgeons that have come through have really reiterated that this is an amazingly impactful thing for them. As surgeons, we learn by doing, not by watching, and so we're really able to get them the education that they need. So thank you for your attention. If you have questions, my email's at the bottom there. I'm happy to collaborate. I'm happy to talk to any hospital's administration about our experience that may need some persuading, that it's going to be safe, that it's going to be okay, that this is a good idea. So please reach out to me, and thank you for your attention and for being part of this conference.